Hadley Manning. And Hadley is a 2010 graduate of the University of North Carolina. She's a North Carolina girl, so if she gets excited when she's speaking, she might start going back to a southern drawl, okay? And she was 15 years with the Independent Women's Forum, and now she's also been with Steamboat Institute since 2016. So without any further ado, you've got the floor, young lady.
All right, thank you.
All right.
Before I get started, I do just want to say about Lisa and the announcement she just made. I worked 15 years for Independent Women's Forum, and these issues related to gender ideology, to what's happening to our children, what's happening in public education, what's happening in terms of the confusion, what's happening in sports, and not just sports, but sororities, domestic violence shelters, prisons. These are places that traditionally and typically would be sex segregated, and it doesn't mean anything if we change the definition of sex or if we replace sex with gender identity. So what Protect Kids Colorado is doing is extremely important, and I hope all of you will consider taking Lisa up on her offer to help with her programs. But I'm here tonight to speak on behalf of the Steamboat Institute, and I'm just so honored to be your August speaker. I understand it's the dog days of August. I've got 4 young kids in my household. The oldest is 9, and I have a 7 and a 4 and a 1, and so we are looking forward to the return of school, kind of dreading the return of school, but we know that the return of school will represent a big shift for our family. So big shout out to my husband, Aaron, who's at home doing quadruple bedtime without me tonight. Thank you so much, Mark, for praying for us tonight, and I too am praying for wisdom and this message that I'm going to deliver to all of you, and also for courage and boldness in the work that we do at the Steamboat Institute. And it's work that I think all of you are engaged in, because the principles that we advocate for, our mission is to advocate for America's first principles. And we're going to talk about what those are, but I think they're principles that everyone who identifies as a conservative or libertarian or Republican would share and would say that these are important. Ultimately, I think every American should say that these principles are important, and shouldn't be a partisan divide on these issues, shouldn't be a partisan divide on the founding principles that have made America for nearly 250 years the successful and amazing country that it is. So I thought I would make this fun, since I noticed there's a whiteboard in here. I thought, let's make this a little bit interactive. Rather than me just jumping in and telling you, well, these are what our core principles are, I thought I would ask all of you, what do you think America's first principles are? What do you think America's founding principles are? So anybody can raise their hand or shout something out, and I'm going to write it on the board.
First is God.
God, okay?
Constitution.
Constitution. Any other ideas?
Individual freedom.
Individual freedom. Any other ideas?
Private property.
Private property. These are good ones. Any more?
Education.
Education. An educated populace, right?
Yeah.
Democratic rule.
Democratic rule. Maybe like social contract kind of stuff between the individual and the government. Any other ideas?
Public safety.
Public safety.
Limited government.
Limited government. Have you been looking on our website? You're echoing some of the things that I'm going to talk about.
I haven't yet.
Limited government, for sure. Well, great. Well, let me get into this a little bit. When I sit next to a stranger on a plane and they say, what do you do for a living? I say, I work for the Steamboat Institute. And they say, well, what's that? And I say, well, our mission is to advocate for America's first principles. And to the stranger on an airplane, that's not necessarily clear, because not everybody in America knows what America's first principles are. So I thought I would start there by kind of breaking down what we have identified as 5 core principles that are really important to us at the Steamboat Institute. Some of them are on the board, some of them I will add. Other things that are up here are really important issues and really important things that I believe in too, but they're not necessarily on our list of our 5 core principles. But before I do that, I want to back up even further and talk about where those principles come from. And so it might sound a little bit like a history lesson or an ivory tower discussion, but it's really not, because I'm going to eventually get to pointing out case studies and modern day examples of things that are happening in issues like healthcare, or with what just happened with the One Big Beautiful Bill Act, the budget that we're dealing with at the federal government. So I'm going to connect all of this to real world stuff. It's not just going to be an ivory tower discussion. And before I even go there, I'm going to start by talking about why this is so important. Gallup just released a survey that deals with American pride. And I'm sure that I don't need to speak to anybody in this room about this, because we all just stood up and said the Pledge of Allegiance. I think everybody in the room participated. And I know this group is showing up to events like this one tonight because you care about this country and you believe in this country and you believe that the American project has been a force for good in the world and has been a great success. But unfortunately, there are more and more people in our country who don't believe that. There are more and more people in our country who have been lied to and who have come to believe that America is not a force for good, that America hasn't been a success, that America hasn't been a city on a hill, as Reagan and others might have described it. And so, even though I know I don't need to preach to the choir on this, I'm going to highlight 3 areas, 3 pieces of evidence that I would say that the American project has been enormously successful. And we should all, every American, have great pride in our country. And I do that because, unfortunately, we're just in a situation right now where you may have a grandchild or a niece or nephew who at your next family gathering says, America's not good. And I want you all to feel empowered with good answers and good responses and good evidence for the case that actually, yes, America is good. And you can look at the real world results. So the first area that I want to talk about is the American economy. This isn't the most important thing, but it's the easiest piece of evidence to pull. We have the largest economy in the world, the most successful, prosperous economy in the world, the highest standard of living at all levels of anywhere in the world. I've traveled the world extensively. I can tell you the average middle-income American does far better than the average middle-income person, even in our peer countries, like countries in Western Europe. Many Americans don't know this. They think, oh, because they have socialized health care or because they have other government benefits in some of these other parts of the world, that somehow makes people better off. That's not the case. Not only have Americans been more prosperous and have had higher standards of living on average, but the American economy has been the engine of innovation that has changed the entire world with new drugs, new discoveries, new technologies that we have exported to the rest of the world, different ways of doing things that have increased the productivity of other countries, that have increased worldwide productivity and have definitely put a real dent in poverty. Now, we have poverty in the United States. I'm not going to lie to you and say that we don't have poverty here. But we have combated poverty in the United States very effectively. And there are places in the world where dire poverty is much worse than it is in the United States. So I hope that America's school children are getting that education and learning that, we have our problems as a country, as an economy. Sure, we have some income and wealth inequality, but we have been incredibly prosperous. And that's because of some of these principles that we're going to talk about later. Another piece of evidence that America is great and a successful force for good and has been for 250 years is the American society and culture. And the American society and our culture, unfortunately, have taken a severe beating in the media, in the university, in some of the movements that have come along in recent years during the COVID pandemic, the Black Lives Matter movement, brought back to the surface again some of the debate and discussion that's very important about America's history, about America's sins, about our tensions, racially and otherwise. But I will posit that the United States actually has the most open and tolerant society on the face of the earth. I challenge anybody to find another society or culture in another country that is as welcoming to immigrants and that has lower levels of prejudice than the United States. And you can look through world values studies, you can look through surveys of would you care if your neighbor who moved in next to you was a different skin color? America does exceptionally well in surveys like this. We are incredibly open and tolerant compared to other countries. Now, that's a relative metric. I'm not here to tell you that we have no prejudice. I'm not here to tell you that we have no problems. Actually, there's one type of prejudice and intolerance that I think is getting worse, and that's actually political intolerance. I think Americans are becoming less and less tolerant of different people's political views, so that's certainly something I'm concerned about. But over our past 250 years, America has been working towards a more perfect union and working towards the principles that we initially set out and charted a path towards better equality for all people. And not only is our society generally relatively open and tolerant, but we are typically the world's #1 when it comes to charitable giving. We're typically the world's #1 when it comes to volunteerism and giving of our time and effort and energy to our communities. We've had incredibly strong civil society, mediating institutions, churches, private organizations. I think Alexis de Tocqueville was the first person to observe that about American society, that precisely because our government is limited, we have a very strong civil society. So these are all things that we should be very proud of about American culture and American society. And then finally, the last thing I say about America as a force for good is that internationally and throughout the world, when it comes to safety, when it comes to security, America has been an incredible force for ensuring freedom and security of people around the world. And today I think there's a very good and important debate about exactly what that role should look like for America. But there's no doubt that our participation in things like World War I and World War II changed the course of history forever. And we should be very proud of that as Americans. We should be very proud of our military. It is the strongest in the world. We should be proud of the people who have served, who have sacrificed for this country. I know I am. So next time this comes up at your family dinner table, you can talk about the American economy, our society, and our military as undeniably forces for good in the history of the world. This 250-year project that we have been working on and that we're still working on has been a great success, and not just because of our system of government, but because of our people and because of the things that everyday Americans do to try to make our communities and ultimately our world a better place. So let's talk a little bit more about the first principles and the system of government that set the scene for all of that success and for all of these good things to come to fruition. I'm going to go back to the board here, and someone mentioned the Constitution. The Constitution is not on my list of first principles, but it is a document that is built on our first principles, and it's a document that's really downstream of another important document that I'm going to talk about, and that's the Declaration of Independence. We're going to celebrate on July 4th next year, 250 years since the signing of the Declaration. That really marked the beginning of the American project in 1776. And I'm going to quote from the Declaration of Independence something that we've all heard 1,000 times. But when people ask me about what are America's first principles, what are our founding principles, I go back to this line. All men are created equal and endowed by our Creator, God, with unalienable rights to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Okay, so that one sentence of the Declaration of Independence captures a few things. Equality, which I think is a very important value in America that differentiated us, I think, to a degree that we don't fully appreciate in the modern era, from the whole history of mankind being one that was built on different class systems and different systems that segregated people throughout society based on what type of aristocracy or blood or nobility they were from. The American project set out with a completely different ideal, that all men are created equal and endowed by their Creator with their rights. Now, that's an important part, because it set aside the idea that government grants rights. Government doesn't grant rights. And as Americans, we should all understand that. The government can protect our rights and should protect our rights, but it doesn't grant our rights. Our rights come from God. Our rights are transcendent. They are above and beyond any man-made government or man-made law. Now, this is important because it also points to another key principle in the Declaration of Independence that gets mentioned several times. It's nature's God, or the laws of nature, or natural law. So the American system, the Constitution, is built on the ideas in the Declaration, which is built on ideas from natural law theory. And one of the important pieces of natural law theory is that not only do our rights come from God and not government, but our rights are negative rights. Our rights are things that we have the freedom to pursue. We have the freedom to pursue happiness. But unlike in other governmental systems, unlike, for example, the Declaration of Human Rights that was developed by United Nations, We don't have a list of things in America that you have a right to, like you don't have a right to a job, you don't have a right to health care, you don't have a right to food, you don't have a right to water. These are all things that I believe every person should have, but that doesn't make them rights that our government has to guarantee for every citizen. There's no guarantees in America of those things. Instead, you have the freedom, and I hope the capacity and the education and the skills and the foundation to go pursue those things and get not only the things that you need, but even more abundantly the things that you want, the things that enrich your life and bring you happiness. So that's sort of the background of where these principles come from. And so now I'm going to go through a list of 5 things that are core principles at the Steamboat Institute they're working to advance. And one of them is already on the board, and it's limited government. Now, when I'm sitting next to the stranger on the plane, and I say, well, one of our principles is limited government, I don't know who I'm talking to. I don't know if I'm talking to a Republican or a Democrat. I don't know if somebody's going to say, oh, limited government. It sounds like you're a conservative. No, limited government is for everybody. Limited government is something that every American can appreciate. If you like the Bill of Rights, if you like the First Amendment, if you like free speech, free press, free assembly, freedom to petition the government, freedom of religion, you like limited government, because all these amendments that start the Bill of Rights are limits on government. They are literally limits on government. They say Congress shall make no law inhibiting all of these freedoms that are then listed. So when I talk about limited government, and I want to show that limited government has universal appeal to all Americans, or it should, I point out the fact that our foundational documents, including the Bill of Rights, are limitations on government. And when government is limited, that simply means that other things can be big. And one of those things is individual freedom. So this is another one of our 5 core principles at the Steamboat Institute, individual freedom. Not only can individual freedom be big when government is limited and government stays in its proper role, but other things can be big too. And this is where I think people on the right get bad branding. And we let the left sort of say, oh, okay, you believe in individualism, you believe in every man for himself, just pick yourself up by your bootstraps. That's not right. When government can be limited, that also means that our churches can be big, our private organizations can be big, our universities can be big, our fraternities and sororities can be big, our families can be big. Any organization that's not the government, the marketplace, can be big. These institutions can be big, and can be big problem solvers for our society. Better problem solvers in many cases than the government itself. So that's another argument for limited government. But individual freedom and limited government are 2 sides of the same coin. You can't have big government and individual freedom. You have to have limited government in order to have individual freedom. Another important core principle of the Steamboat Institute that is very similar to private property is free market capitalism. So I'm going to write this one up here. Free market capitalism, we combine into one thing, but I would really say it's 2 things. It's having a free market, and it's also having capitalism. Now, I'll explain a little bit about what I mean by that. A free market means there's low regulation. It means that people have the ability to make business decisions absent government interference in the marketplace. Market economies are marked by market competition. The forces of supply and demand keep prices under control. People have many options of different suppliers and producers in the market. And suppliers and producers have a good number of buyers. So there's not single buyers, there's not single payers, there's not monopolies, but you have a competitive free marketplace. Now, capitalism simply means private ownership of the means of production, private ownership of capital. And that's why capitalism is not compatible with socialism or communism. But you can have capitalism that is not free market. And sometimes this is talked about in terms of crony capitalism or cronyism. And to give one modern day example of this, I would say our healthcare system is capitalistic in many ways. Many of the biggest healthcare and health insurance companies in this country are privately owned. but they are not really privately controlled because the business decisions in healthcare are largely dictated by government policy, not only through the Medicare and Medicaid programs, which are huge market shares, but also through the myriad regulations that were handed down and promulgated because of the 2010 health reform law. And we've had challenges with overregulation of healthcare at the state level in the United States too, but all of this is just to offer an example that really, if you want capitalism to work, it also needs to be free market capitalism. You can't have an overly managed economy and capitalism and expect people to really benefit from the freedom and prosperity that free market capitalism can offer and has offered Americans for 250 years. Another big important core principle at the Steamboat Institute that we emphasize is fiscal responsibility. And this is an aspect of limited government, but I'll write it up here. Fiscal responsibility. We always say fiscal responsibility and limited taxation. And we say that together because there is a school of thought that you can be fiscally responsible so long as you raise taxes high enough to cover the exorbitant amounts of spending that governments are doing on various levels. So we emphasize that fiscal responsibility really does emphasize limited taxation. If you overtax the economy, you're destroying the only engine of wealth creation. Governments don't create wealth. Governments need revenue to do their services, to do their proper role. When I say I believe in limited government, I'm not saying I believe in no government. I think there is an important role for government in society. But that revenue has to be collected from an economy that generates wealth, that creates wealth. And that only happens in the private sector. That's why it's important for taxation to be limited to the degree that government gets the revenues that it needs, but doesn't go above and beyond that to pay for spending that makes no sense, that becomes counterproductive to our prosperity, that adds to our national deficits, that adds to our national debt. And so fiscal responsibility is a core important part of what we believe in. And maybe here I'll mention the One Big Beautiful Bill, because I know there's been a lot of discussion about whether this budget bill is fiscally responsible or not. Now, it keeps in place a lot of tax cuts that were initially created by the 2017 Tax Cuts and Jobs Act. And that is the biggest contributing factor to making this bill look budget negative on paper. But when it comes to the spending side, the One Big Beautiful Bill reduces spending. And in my view, is ultimately going to be a force for good in our budget picture because it refocuses government on its proper role. And here's another example that I would give to the stranger on the plane next to me. I would say many organizations have a mission, and you spend money on what your mission is for. Okay, my husband works at a hospital. They spend a lot of money on providing healthcare services. Hospitals are a bad example because they also spend a lot of money on administration and insurance and billing and following government rules and all that. But let's say they spend a lot of money on labor. Sure, physicians, nurses, they need that stuff. That's important stuff for a hospital to spend money on. You could look at the cafeteria at the hospital and see how much money are they spending on meals for patients. And then you might say, well, they don't care about world hunger. They don't care about whether people eat or not. How heartless of them. Well, that's just not the mission of the hospital. The mission of the hospital is not to end world hunger. The mission of the hospital is to care for the patients that are in it. In the same way, I think our budget debate in this country has gone completely sideways because so many Americans look at the federal budget and they say, oh my gosh, they're not spending on health care. They're not spending on education. They're not spending on these things that are important to me and my community. Well, those things are incredibly important to every community. But that doesn't mean it's the mission of the federal government to provide those things. Education should be the prerogative of states. It is a huge line item in state budgets. That doesn't mean that it has to be a big line item in the federal government budget as well. And so the One Big Beautiful Bill moves the focus of our federal spending more towards areas like immigration enforcement and military strength that have to do with the core purpose of the federal government. So it's not about what we value as a society. What we value as a society we can see in how we spend our private dollars. We can see in how states spend money. We can see in how communities spend money. We can see how mission-driven organizations like the Steamboat Institute spend money on our programs. But measuring how the federal government spends its dollars, we should measure that by whether the federal government is doing its job of protecting the citizens within it, protecting the rights of the citizens within it through the judicial system, through a military, through border protection, through things that are the exclusive purview of the federal government. Okay, and finally, I'll go to our fifth and related core principle, and that is a strong national defense. Now, this is something that I touched on when I said America has the strongest military in the world, and it is something that we believe in at the Steamboat Institute, that we have to defend and protect the safety and security of the people who live inside of our borders, and we have to defend our national interests globally. And if we don't do that, then everything else that we hold dear, our free market economy that has made us so prosperous, our individual freedom that has given us happiness and the pursuit of happiness, our limited government, our fiscal responsibility that have created a really big and successful civil society, a great place to live and raise a family that has led millions of people to come to our shores from other nations. You don't have anything if you can't defend it. And so that's why it's very important to us that America maintains a strong national defense. And so finally, I'm going to share a little bit about our programs and how we take these principles that we believe in so strongly and put them into action. We have 4 big programs at the Steamboat Institute. One of them is the Campus Liberty Tour. And we believe in going to college campuses and talking about issues that relate to these big principles, because we know that college students are really interested and really formative, really at a point in life where they're trying to decide what they think about a lot of this stuff. But we don't just go into college campuses with speakers who stand in front of a room of students and lecture them, kind of like I feel like I'm lecturing you guys. I hope I don't sound too much like I'm giving a lecture, but students get, kind of bored of things like that, or they end up protesting events like that. And we didn't want either of those outcomes. So instead, what we bring to college campuses are debates. We pick a topic, whether it's the topic of diversity, equity, inclusion, the topic of women's sports, which Lisa mentioned earlier, the topic of birthright citizenship, the topic of tariffs. We pick a topic, we find 2 of the best speakers that we can find. Last fall, we had Vivek Ramaswamy and John Bolton debating America's role in the world. We had Josh Hammer and Dave Smith, who is a comedian and podcaster. He's very well known among the college crowd. They debated the U.S. relationship with Israel. We had a debate between Steve Moore and Stephanie Kelton on the national debt last semester. So we go out and find the best speakers that we can find on 2 sides of any given issue. We take them to a college campus. We go across the country to different college campuses. We've been to many big public universities, many Ivy League schools here in Colorado. Last semester, we went to Colorado Mesa. We went to UC Boulder, or CU Boulder, I guess, as the Colorado people say. And we bring these big, important discussions to college campuses with 2 different perspectives so that students can really hear and really open their minds to the principles and the ideas that we hold so dear. Because we know that people don't necessarily want to open their mind when they think, hey, here's a speaker who's here to convince me of something. But when they're going to hear a debate, they're going to open their mind more. They're going to say, okay, well, they're presenting 2 different sides. And we ask people before the debate, what do you think about this issue? And we ask people at the end of the debate, what do you think about this issue? And I think, if nothing else, these debates are at least opening the minds of many young Americans to see that the limited government argument in many cases deserves to be heard. It's based on rational, thought. It's made in good faith. It's not demonized. It's not what they've been led to believe, that it's, those MAGA people, they're all bigots and they just believe in what they believe in because of greed or racism. No, when they come to our debates, they see that's not the case. They see that there are good reasons for believing what we believe, even if they don't suddenly change their mind on the spot that evening. Now, many of them do. Many people do change their minds, but at least we're opening the minds of many people to consider various points of view on the topics that we're bringing to college campuses. So the Campus Liberty Tour, We're in the process right now of lining up 6 debates for the fall semester this year. We're going to have some really good ones. We're going to have a debate about whether America is facing a constitutional crisis, because there are some people who say that we are. So we're going to have Jonathan Turley argue that, no, we're not facing a constitutional crisis. And we have an invitation pending with a prominent law school dean at Berkeley that I hope will argue against Jonathan Turley. So all of these debates are live streamed. All of them are available on our YouTube channel after the fact. So if you enjoy a good debate, if any of the ones that I mentioned interest you, I encourage you to go check out our YouTube channel or tune in as we live stream them throughout this next fall semester. Our other 3 major programs are our Freedom Conference, and I want to call your attention to some flyers that I have on this table over here. Our Freedom Conference happens once a year in August in the mountains of Colorado. It is a huge national conference. We have speakers coming from all over the country. We have people attending from all over the country. This year it's August 22nd and 23rd. Brett Bayer is going to be our keynote speaker. We have Michelle Tafoya as a luncheon speaker. We have amazing panels on some of the threats that America is facing geopolitically around the world. We have a panel of university professors going to talk about free speech on campus. So it's going to be an action-packed 2 days in Beaver Creek. I hope all of you can come join us. That's a major program of ours. On the Friday night of our conference, we will award our fellowship, and each year we have a new fellow. This is how I became initially involved with the Steamboat Institute. In 2016, I was named the Tony Blankley Fellow. And we have a Tony Blankley Fellow every year. It's an amazing group of mid-career journalists and advocates in the public policy world. And this year we're going to be naming a very dynamic young woman to that fellowship. So that's another one of our major programs. And then finally, last but definitely not least, we have a program called the Emerging Leaders Council. And that is for anyone aged 20 to 29 who's an emerging leader in their community. We have members from across the country. It's a pretty competitive selection process. It's a pretty intimate group. We have about 45 members right now, but we bring them together on 2 occasions throughout the year. We have a summit for them that's all about leadership training. We train them in media, op-ed writing. We equip them with every possible tool that they need to be effective leaders in their communities. We also open up, I hope, a broad network of people who can help them be successful at their work, whatever it is. And we also bring them to our Freedom Conference. We meet with them monthly and we do ongoing mentorship with them. But the Emerging Leaders Council is a really important program for us because we think we've got to invest in the next generation. When I mentioned the Gallup poll at the beginning about declining patriotism and declining American pride, I can tell you when I dug into the numbers that the most discouraging pieces are among Democrats. Democrats have concluded that they have less pride in America. I think some of that may be because they don't like who's in the White House. My American pride has never been affected by who's in the White House, but some people may allow that to blur their vision on that. But also among young people. And so it's very important to us at the Steamboat Institute through our college debates and through our Emerging Leaders Council to invest in young people, to really pass on these principles and what they mean and why they're important. Clearly we have a lot of work to do because all of us in this room can look at these principles and say, absolutely, those are things we agree with. I hope you can all say that. I hope you can all say, let's go, let's take these principles out to people and let's be real defenders of these principles. But unfortunately, there are a lot of people in this country who may have gone through our education system. They might even have college degrees. They might have PhDs, and they couldn't tell you why these principles are so important and why these are the things that have made the American project of 250 years a great success, a great blessing. And so that's why we do what we do, and that's why it's so important to talk to groups like this one and also to people who are in our Emerging Leaders Council and on college campuses, to our fellows, to people who attend our Freedom Conference. So I guess with that, I'll conclude with an invitation. I hope that many of you will join me in Beaver Creek and be a part of that conference there. And I want to thank Rich for inviting me to speak. And Rich, if anybody has any questions, I'll be happy to take any.
The floor is now open, ladies and gentlemen.
In the back, Rob?
That's Rob.
Hi, Rob.
Thank you, Hadley. How do you most effectively address the Democrat advocation of rights? Because they're very good at demagoguing the whole definition of what rights consist of, as far as they stretch it to fit whatever the political narrative is.
Right. It's a great question. I think, one of the biggest debates of my time anyway has been about the right to health care.
Right.
Sometimes in the social policy area, it turns into like women's health care, women's rights to health care. But even more broadly speaking, the right to medical care in general, the right to health insurance, for example. I remember when many people on the Democratic side would go in the Capitol building. When I lived in DC, the big debate was over Obamacare. They'd go in the Capitol building, they would lay down on the floor in the Capitol building with a cardboard sign that was supposed to be their tombstone. And the suggestion was, if you don't vote for Obamacare, if you try to defund it, if you try to change it, if you try to take it away, not only are you taking away people's right to health care, but you are killing them, and their blood is on your hands. And that level of demagoguery and that level of hyperbole in our political discourse is a huge problem. Don't get me started on that. I could do another 45-minute talk on that. But to answer your question, simply put, positive rights are incompatible with the American model because positive rights, or the right to health care, the right to a job, the right to education, the right to anything, requires something of someone else. And the question for anyone who advocates for the positive rights model is, where are you going to get that from? If my husband is a physician, he is, if you believe you have a right to health care, what you're saying essentially is you have a right to his services. You have a right to his services. And that comes with a cost to him. His time, his education, his energy, his effort, the investment, and the training. Who's going to pay for that? And it's not that it's a matter of money, because I think that's where conservatives get in trouble. The left argues about people, the right argues about money. When it's people versus money, we lose every time. But there are realities, and there's a really great YouTube video. I'm going to make fun of Rich a little bit because he said school sucks earlier. But there is a YouTube video that's really funny about why it sucks to be a conservative. And one of the things the speaker says in that video is because you have to acknowledge reality. And the reality is that positive rights, as nice as they sound, positive rights, things I wish and hope and pray that every human has, healthcare being one of those things, are non-compatible with the American way because you would be forcing someone else to give of their labor, to give of their time, to give of their energy, their training, their education, to fulfill the need that you have. Now, on the other hand, I think a strong argument for this is let's focus on solutions that will actually make it easier and better for more people to access these things that we can all agree are human needs, that we can all agree are things that we want people to have, even if we disagree about whether they're defined as rights or not. And so that's why I think it's very important for us to emphasize, market pricing in healthcare would alleviate immediately the physician shortage. Our country's going to have a big shortage in healthcare labor, okay? Especially as baby boomers go onto the Medicare program and as we have longer lives. I mean, these are great things to have longer lives, but it comes with a cost to our medical system. And that cost is out of control in large part because we don't have the physicians and the nurses that we need. But markets are so important here because they can signal that that type of labor is in high demand, right? And that would bring more people into those professions. It'd bring more people, it would change the way we do medical training, which is highly regulated, so highly regulated. The number of spots in medical schools, the number of residency spots that are available, these are all things that are dictated essentially through the Medicare program. And the reason we have the shortages that we have now are not because the market has somehow failed to deliver. It's because the market hasn't been free to operate, because so much of healthcare has been managed and mismanaged by the government. So if we really believe in let's give the best healthcare to all people, then a market system is going to be more effective at doing that. So it's a twofold answer. One is positive rights just don't work. And the other is markets can and would work if they'd be free to do so.
Amen.
Thanks, Sally.
Any other questions?
One of the things that's really been bothering me lately is the situation in England where they've got like 4,000 people who've been locked up serving prison sentences for just exercising freedom of speech. They've got a woman in there who's got a 3-year sentence, I think she's facing, which is longer than they give to the Pakistani rapists that they arrest and prosecute, though there are very few of those. And the freedom of speech is so important that be continued. The other aspect of it is with the transgender trying to get compelled speech, which is really being pushed in Colorado and already exists, I think, toward teachers and school employees, that you can be brought up and fined $500 a day for violations if you don't follow their pronouns, their preferred pronouns or something. That's a very important thing, because if you can go to prison or be sued just for your speech, that ought to be focused on significantly.
I agree, and I was just listening to a podcast with Douglas Murray, who's a great advocate for freedom of speech in the UK. It's unbelievable and very sad what's happening there, because a lot of our legal system and a lot of our beginnings as a nation in America, we kind of inherited from the UK, and now we are much better on certain measures like free speech, than our peer countries and countries that we inherited some traditions from. But I would say, to your second point about the compelled speech, it's a huge problem, and it's been going on for a long time. And it's not just compelled speech at the state government level, like we may face in Colorado in the education system, but I've encountered it even in the media. And this is different from your legal right to free speech, but it still affects the ability of the populace to hear the truth and to hear various perspectives on certain issues. So I would write, say, working for Independent Women's Forum, I'd write an op-ed arguing, let's say, for women's spaces. Like, I really believe strongly that a domestic violence shelter that is for battered women should be for women only. Let's say I wrote something to that effect, arguing strongly that no one who identifies as female but is not in fact female should be admitted into sacred, safe places like this. If I submitted that op-ed to a paper whose editorial standard was that I could not, quote unquote, misgender someone, they wouldn't run the piece. So they'd go back to the author and say, you have to change these pronouns here and there in order for us to run this piece. To me, that was hugely problematic, because the likelihood is the readership of exactly those papers needed to hear the argument more than people who are reading National Review and people who are reading The Spectator and people who are reading Washington Free Beacon and all the right-leaning publications, right? And so that, to me, is a big part of why the extreme left is in an ideological bubble when it comes to that particular issue. When it comes to the gender issues, you'll find people, medical doctors, people with PhDs, people who are otherwise very intelligent, who have lost their way on that issue, and I really believe it's just because they are in an information bubble. That the papers that they read and the places they get their information, the media they read, have forgotten how to use basic biological terms. I mean, you'll find in the medical journals, you'll find papers written about people with ovaries instead
What
of
happened to common
women.
sense?
Yeah. What happened to common sense? That's Sally's question. What happened? It's a good rhetorical question. What happened to common sense? I mean, I think ultimately, all of this that we're talking about, the freedom that we enjoy, our founders saw that as going hand in hand with responsibility. Freedom comes with responsibility. It does. It's a fact. It's not, we can misuse or ignore or avoid or shirk responsibility, but then if you have freedom and you don't take responsibility, you end up totally failing, and you end up very unhappy. You end up without the prosperity. You end up, so the reason that we've been successful is not just because we've had freedom, but because Americans have decided to take responsibility for ourselves, and we've decided to take pride in our country. We've been strivers. We've been hardworking culture. We've built amazing things in America throughout the centuries, and that's all a really great story. But that was also driven by a sense of duty and a sense of virtue and a sense of right and wrong, and a sense that not only are we given rights by our Creator, but there's an expectation. To whom much is given, much is expected. And so unfortunately, I think a lot of the issues in our society are interrelated. You know, I know a lot of people are very optimistic about the direction that we're heading in as a country. Maybe you agree with President Trump, you like a lot of his policies, but there are also causes for concern. Maybe some issues that the government can't fix, issues that relate to the human heart and to the direction of society and whether we have pride in who we are as a people and as a nation, as a country. And those are not things that I think any law can fix. But the good news is I think those are things that we can all be a part of fixing in our communities and just demonstrating, living our lives and trying to be good examples to the people who are closest to us in our spheres, being good parents, being good grandparents, being community leaders and volunteer organizations that we participate in. So I'm not despairing by any means, but I do think it's going to take more than any administration, more than any one leader, more than any term, more than any, election to change the future of the country. It's always been about what everyday American people do, and it's going to continue to be about that. And I hope people choose common sense. I hope people choose virtue. I hope they choose responsibility. And if we do, we'll be all right. Yes.
Well, we do have to remember what happened last November. The American people spoke, and that's very encouraging.
That's right. I'm curious to see what happens next, because I watch what's happening in New York City, for example, with the socialists on the ballot. And it seems that the left is going to continue to allow these issues on the extreme wing of their party to kind of dictate the direction that they go in. That is so off-putting to so many people that I think a lot of the votes that President Trump picked up in November were people who are just absolutely have had it with the direction of the country and the direction of the extreme left and the ideological capture of some of our most important institutions. And if the left manages to make a course correction on those things, I was very curious when Gavin Newsom came out and said, well, on the women's sports issue, we should moderate, we should check ourselves on that. I thought, goodness, finally, somebody who matters in the Democrat Party is saying that. Because for a long time, they were whipping their members into total silence and total cowardice on that issue. And so if the left can moderate on some of those issues, we'll have a real race. But if they continue to go in that direction, I don't see how they can ever regain the majority of American voters, middle-class voters, working-class voters, young men. There are whole swaths of the population that the left has totally written off and totally discouraged who may never come back because they've staked out such an extreme position on some of these issues. So they've really done it to themselves, I think, in a large part. But you're right. This is an opportunity right now. Imagine if Kamala Harris were in the White House, or imagine if Joe Biden didn't have the health or longevity to do it. But you can imagine any number of things could have gone differently over the past 12 years. Hillary Clinton could have won, and that would have been a totally different direction for recent American history. But I hope we don't squander the opportunity, and I hope we can also remember that at the end of President Trump's second term, that it's still up to us to do the right things.
It's moving in the right direction.
In the right direction.
All those years, I'm a med school dropout.
Oh, are you?
Anyway, but all those years of teaching school, I sat back there. There's 27,000 high schools in the United States. If we can have one person like her in each high school teaching poli-sci, rather than those brainwashed ones that are walking around like zombies, not understanding economics at all, I would love to duplicate by 27,000 fold, okay? But thank you so much.
Thank you.